A big part of my job is trying to find the words that best describe what this job is about. It's a topic that comes up often when getting to know people at parties, on the train, or wherever. So far, my go-to explanation has been that early music at its most exciting is sort of like being an archaeologist, except with music. Discovering treasures of the past and making them sound again after they had collected dust in some archive for centuries. But only recently did I realize that this analogy doesn't really explain things all that well. Music is, and always has been, a living, breathing thing. And discovering some old book, assuming to have found music, is like digging up a bunch of old bones and calling it a dinosaur. So when asked what I do for a living, perhaps my go-to line shouldn't be, it's kind of like Indiana Jones, but instead, do you know Jurassic Park? To experience what old music actually used to sound like, it needs to be reborn time and time again, in the moment, with written traces only supplying us with some musical DNA to work from. This genetic code is oftentimes highly fragmented though, so a large part of our job is filling the gaps. And just like in art restoration, the success of this reconstructive process largely depends on the restorer's skill, the results not always turning out to be convincing. More often than not, the source material further complicates this process. One example being the lute book of Hans Herwarth, a merchant and amateur lute player who lived in the mid-1500s. He clearly didn't copy the music in order to preserve it for posterity, but instead simply for his own use, writing down just enough to remember these pieces. In this book there are no indications of tempo whatsoever, at times wrong or missing bars, bar lines, or even rhythm signs. Notes have no ornament symbols, sometimes appear in the wrong order, on the wrong line, or are illegible altogether. Now, just as finding a skeleton without a jawbone shouldn't lead us to assume that some dinosaurs simply didn't have jaws, such manuscripts shouldn't allow us to think that this music was bland or simple. So let's have a look at this one page, for example, to try and reconstruct its contents. After the end of this piece, we have the shorthand indicating that it's a ricercare, a type of composition, and that it's by a certain MDLA, the initials of the lutenist Marco dall'Aquila from the city of Venice. On the top we have this little hand, a manicule, pointing towards the piece and implying that there must be something noteworthy about it. I'm actually still wondering what the little cursive note right above it says, to be honest. The next step is playing through the piece once, so we can have a rough idea what it sounds like. Let's first hear it exactly as it is notated, nothing more and nothing less. I'll avoid adding anything that's not written there, like dynamics or phrasing. So apart from some copying errors and an awkward rhythm here and there, the piece works. Though, considering that it doesn't exactly seem like it's meant for deep contemplation, it didn't sound too exciting or fun either. It's also a little short, and there's a weird change of harmonies at one point. Let's try to fix all that. An important thing to realize when doing so is that ornaments and rhythmical details were often left annotated. Not because they weren't used, but the exact opposite. Musicians considered them so natural and self-explanatory that there was no real need to write them down in the first place. Though several texts from that time tell us that skillful musicians not only practically stuffed their playing with all kinds of embellishments and slurs, but also used a kind of loose rhythmical feel, perhaps best comparable to what jazz musicians call swing. You wouldn't write that over every single note, it's just something you do. So I took our piece, and in addition to fixing some minor details here and there, I tried applying all that information to how I play it, at times deliberately exaggerating with how much decoration I added to it. It might be surprising how different one and the same piece can sound when played in this way, though perhaps you'll also agree that in this new light, an ancient piece of music can suddenly seem much less washed out and tame than previously assumed, and altogether just simply more alive. For more videos like this one, you can always visit my website, musicamemo.com, where you'll not only find all previous episodes, but also a newsletter to which you can simply subscribe with your email address. This way I can send you a message whenever I release a new episode, which usually happens once a week, right before the weekend. So I hope to be seeing you next Friday for another installment of Memo. And if you enjoyed this video and would like to support what I do, please consider telling your friends about my show. Memo is a project I started in the hopes of introducing many new listeners to this kind of music, and the only way for me to reach them is through your support.